Hello, and welcome back. If you're joining us again, and if this is your first watch, welcome to Is It Just Me with Jess and Luke. It's the podcast dedicated to your unpopular opinions. We're live today, so make sure that you are getting involved with the show because we'll be reading out your questions and comments as we go through. So, as always, let us know what you're thinking as we're going through. It's quite a spicy one again, as always. I mean, this is what this show is all about. And as always, I'm joined by Luke Smith. Luke, you have picked out today's topic after it triggered you on Twitter, didn't you?
Yeah, a little bit. It's a topic that I think after all of the events of the last few weeks with started by Sebastian Vettel's shock exit from Ferrari. It's kind of been a story that's always bubbling away. I think it never really disappears from Formula One recently. I think for the past couple of years, it's something that a lot of people talk about, but it's really gathered steam in the last couple of weeks. And I saw a tweet about it and I thought, no, I'm not having that. Like, I've got to have my say and get it out there, and had a bit of a debate with a few people on Twitter about it, which was good. But obviously, this is the perfect place for it. Obviously, we want lots of fan opinions. We want to talk about this topic and really get to the bottom of it. So I thought it was a perfect subject for this week's podcast.
Well, without being too mysterious about it, let's dive straight in. So today's unpopular opinion this week is actually coming from Formula One presenter. Now, that's a bit of a mouthful to say. Former Formula One presenter Jake Humphrey, who earlier in the week tweeted this. Now, this might not be popular, he says, but we've been here before in F1 regularly. Fans quickly realise that getting what they've already been served isn't that exciting after all. The past few years have shown us that the future in F1 rightly belongs to the youth. And that, of course, is talking about the potential return of one Fernando Alonso. Now, I just want to start right from the get-go. This is all speculation. There has been no kind of hard source or fact to say that Fernando Alonso is returning to Formula One, but even the mere mention of it, which he seems so brilliant to be able to kind of bring himself back to the forefront of what anybody's talking about, leads us here again, and it sparked debate as to whether Fernando Alonso should or shouldn't return to Formula One. So, I mean, Luke, anything else to add about why on earth we're talking about Fernando Alonso again?
He's very good at making sure we talk about him, it must be said. Again, this is a story that hasn't disappeared since his last F1 start at the end of 2018 with McLaren. He walked away from the sport saying that he no longer had the same kind of drive and motivation for racing in F1. He was disappointed with the current state of the sport, how uncompetitive it was, that you only have these big three teams that are fighting for wins. He said if he wanted a top seat, he could have got one, but he didn't want to do it anymore. Went off to Le Mans. He won that twice. Obviously, wants his triple crown. Only the second driver ever in history he would be to achieve it if he can win the Indianapolis 500. But of course, last year failed to qualify for the race. So a real setback that was. He was going to go for another attempt this year. The race has been rescheduled due to the pandemic. He's since done the Dakar Rally as well, and he's just doing lots of different things outside F1. And then a couple of weeks ago, before we had the driver moves that were announced recently, Fernando did an interview where he said that his 2021 plans were sort of more or less set, and he was quite sort of coy and cryptic about what it was. But through all of it, he said that Formula One, that they're delaying the rules again, and he always said it would be when the new rules came into play that that's what could tempt him back to the sport possibly. And he said it was a real shame that was being delayed till 2022. Obviously, we know the reasons for that teams need to be saving costs at this point, so it's very important they're not spending lots of money on development for a new car. It was kind of quite cryptic, and I think we all came away sort of thinking, well, okay, well, they'll probably maybe go back to Le Mans, maybe do Indy again, maybe have another go at Dakar. But I don't think F1 was ever a consideration. And then, boom, Vettel announces he's going. Ricciardo goes to McLaren. Sainz goes to Ferrari. And all of a sudden, there's this Renault seat. Obviously, Renault being the team that Fernando won both his F1 titles with in 05 and 06. And everyone's going, this could happen. Like, it's back on. Fernando could be back on the grid. I'm not so sure, but it's something I'm sure we're going to talk through in the time to follow.
Of course we are. That's what this show is all about. And it's also all about what the fans at home think. So to kick us off, we have a great audio clip from Luca, who is summarising the situation, I think, that a lot of fans might be sharing.
Should we be talking about Alonso coming back to F1? Of course not. Alonso's legacy is very much tarnished. He's obviously been at the wrong place at the wrong time. The fact that we only speak of him as being a world champion twice doesn't do justice to the amount of talent we know that he has. But I don't understand. Okay, if it was with Mercedes or Red Bull or Ferrari, I would understand why he would want to come back. But it's not on his side. I mean, the idea that he's trying to that supposedly he's coming back with Renault of all teams. Yes, he's won 2 titles with them, but they're not in a position to offer him a championship winning car. And even if he was willing to, take up the development for like the next few years, he's going to be 40 in 2021. I mean, yes, Kimi Räikkönen, he's 40, but he doesn't give a monkeys in regards to being in a race winning car or anything. Like why would we have signed with Alpha? Like he clearly doesn't care for that. He just wants to race, wants to get paid for it. And he never contended with Vettel for the championship. He never tried to undermine Vettel at all. So he kind of undermined himself. Sorry, I won't. Okay, my point is, I don't see what Alonso has to gain by coming back to F1, especially when he isn't going to be with a race-winning team. I think he should concentrate his efforts on winning the Indy 500 because that would cement his legacy, being the second driver ever to win the Motorsport Triple Crown.
So there we go. Kind of echoing a lot of the points that you made there, Luke. But another one that he raised there is, what does Alonso have to gain by returning to Formula One?
Well, that's exactly it. I mean, ultimately, he would be chasing a 3rd world championship. That would put him alongside the likes of Niki Lauda and Senna as a triple champion. And I think with Alonso, there's always kind of this, I don't know, people are quite sort of romantic about it. That he should have won more than 2 titles, that he's so much greater than his records really give him credit for. And we all know, obviously, the fallout he had with McLaren in 2007. And then obviously the spell with Ferrari that put him so close to the title on 2 occasions, but never quite got him across the line. And I think that's really the question. Like, ultimately, if he wasn't coming back to fight for race wins, to fight for a championship, what would be the point? Now, as Lucas said, Fernando's not doing it just for lols or for pleasure. He's doing it because he wants to be the best and because he wants to win. And that's something that I think we saw all the way through his time in LMP1 with Toyota in the World Endurance Championship. And even in the Dakar Rally, he didn't go there saying, I'm just going to have a bit of a jolly and a bit of fun. Like, he wanted to win. He wanted to be the best. And he did that in WEC brilliantly. I mean, him and Sebastian Buemi and Kazuki Nakajima together, they won Le Mans twice and they won the World Endurance title, which was a really big achievement. And then he went to Dakar, and I think he got 2nd on one of the stages and quickly proved that he could be quick even in a rally car. And it's incredible, really, really incredible. But at no point did he go, I'm here just to learn, I'm here just to get on with it. He wanted to win. And in Formula One, that would be absolutely what he'd be back to do. So I fully agree that I think if he's coming back, it's got to be with a race-winning team. It's got to be with a project that could give him that 3rd world championship. Otherwise, what's the point?
I mean, is that going to be at Renault? Because obviously, we're talking about there's this glaringly obvious empty seat. But as we know in Formula One, just because a seat isn't empty doesn't mean it isn't going to be given to somebody else. So, I mean, could you see any scenario where Alonso would come back in and maybe it not be with Renault? Put you on the spot a little bit there, Luke.
Yeah, a little bit. No, I can't, to be honest. Like, I can't see there being a scenario where any of the current big 3 teams would be open to bringing him back. And I know Fernando said in the past that he had opportunities and offers to come back with one of those top 3 teams. I'm not really sure whether I believe that, because ultimately Red Bull have made clear that they don't want to alphas, I think is how Christian Horner worded it, in their team. They've got Max Verstappen.
A bit harsh on Albon, don't you think? That's essentially calling him a beta.
Yeah, pretty much. Because Max is their future. Max is the guy they're rallying around. Same with Ferrari. I mean, again, Sainz coming in. Is he going to be the wingman to Leclerc? I don't think he'll want to be, but Leclerc is the guy leading them. Mercedes, they've got Lewis Hamilton, and there's no way you'd pair Lewis Hamilton with Fernando Alonso again. So it just doesn't add up. Like, I can't see a way that Fernando comes back and wins a race or even scores a podium without some crazy stuff happening, because it just doesn't look possible right now.
No, I think I have to agree. I don't, other than that Renault seat, I don't see anything really opening up for Fernando. But I mean, it is just like, I guess let's move on quickly to Fast Cars and Diamonds on Instagram, who had this to say.
I think bringing Alonso back would be bringing back a driver for the sake of just having another driver who has had an amazing career. He's had, you know, his time in the spotlight, but I don't see any point of him returning unless he's probably going to be another fighting contender for the title, which obviously, I mean, I highly doubt. We don't really know what's going to happen with the new rules and regulations, but to have Alonso back, I think it would be nice. It would be quite nostalgic for a lot of fans, but also I think it's time to move on and not keep looking back to drivers who've kind of had their day.
So again there, kind of, again, similar points, and something that I kept seeing, because I put this out, I think we both put this out on Twitter for people to comment on in terms of what they think. And a big part of it, and is what Jake Humphrey was saying right at the top of this show, you know, F1 should belong to the future, and the future are the young drivers that we're seeing coming up through the ranks. But I guess if we're going to talk about Renault in particular, they're kind of running out of options, are they not, in terms of who they have to position next to Ocon in 2021?
Yeah, definitely. And I think that is part of the consideration as well, that I don't think foresaw a situation where Daniel Ricciardo would be leaving. They made clear that Daniel is who we want to build this team around. I think there's a snippet of Cyril Abiteboul saying that in the Drive to Survive Netflix series that people have been circulating in the last few days going, oh, that didn't age well, because it really didn't. Like, they thought the team going forward was Daniel and Esteban, and that would be where their future lay. But now Daniel's gone, it's kind of left them going, well, where is our star driver, our sort of big marquee signing? Because that's what Ricciardo brought to the team. Like, that was a real statement from Renault saying, look, this is what we're building for 2021. This is when we want to do what Mercedes did in 2014. Like, they came back to the grid in 2010 and always said 2014 is when we want to start really, really winning races. And they achieved that very, very successfully. Renault did that for 2021, and sort of a couple of years ago, you talked to people in the paddock, and they were all like, yeah, Renault, that's the team we're watching. That's the team we're sort of scared of for the future. And then that's kind of sort of petered away. And I think Ricciardo, for him to walk away from Renault, not even for a big three team, but from McLaren, Renault's customer team, that's a big statement saying, well, what is really going on at Renault? Like, where is that confidence? And I think looking forward to their sort of young drivers, that, yeah, there's not a sort of a name that's really standing out saying, well, that will make a lot of logical sense for them to get that seat. And I mean, even with Esteban Ocon, he's a great driver, and they did a lot to sign him from Mercedes, but Mercedes still have an option on him, I believe, after 2 years. He could always just go back to Mercedes at the end of it. So is he really their long-term option? I'm not so sure. And then you look at their young drivers. They've said for ages that they want to get someone in from their academy by 2021. They've got Guan Yu Zhou from China in Formula 2. Very, very talented driver. He would make a lot of sense. Renault wants to sort of expand in China. I think he'd be a big sort of a good driver for them to go for, but doesn't have the experience. He's not exactly set Formula 2 on fire. Christian Lundgaard, a really excellent driver, was in Formula 3 last year, set to be in F2 this year. But he's very young. I mean, he was in F4 18 months ago. So it's like, again, would it really be sensible to put him into an F1 seat? I don't know. So it's a real tricky situation because there's not anyone who's sort of screaming out as being the obvious option for them, which is why we're back here talking about Fernando Alonso once again.
Yeah, all great points. And you know what? I hadn't even made the connection between the McLaren as the customer team having now got their star driver, a Renault star driver. That's quite, I mean, I can't imagine that that's helped with relations. And obviously I would hope, and I'm sure everybody at home would hope, that that's not going to cause any disruption at McLaren, because they had such a comeback year last year. It was stellar. We would really hope that them essentially nabbing their kind of star lineup now that, and obviously seeing as Hulkenberg isn't there anymore. But does that raise the question, is Hulkenberg going to make a return? Are we going to see him come out of, well, I guess he never called it retirement, did he? He just got kicked off the grid. So would Hulkenberg be a better choice than Alonso or one of their young drivers? Because as you've pointed out, there are pros and cons for each, which happens in every scenario, but especially right now, like, what does a team like Renault do to kind of save face?
that is the challenge, and I think Renault really have to be sort of careful in terms of playing the market here, and ultimately they've got caught out very, very quickly by how things moved over the last few weeks. That Ferrari made up their minds, McLaren had made up their minds, sign Ricciardo, and that left Renault sort of on their asses a little bit. And I think that they've just got to. It's a fine balance, isn't it? You got to kind of think, well, do I want to wait for the market to move a little bit more? Maybe say wait for Mercedes to make a decision on Valtteri Bottas's future, because he'd be an excellent option for them if he were available.
But a bit of a downgrade for Bottas, though, isn't he? It's a bit of a downgrade to go from Mercedes to Renault. But maybe he'd have a shot at being a lead driver, you know?
You'd love to see that, wouldn't you, Jess?
I'd love it. I mean, it's as we've all pointed out, being Lewis Hamilton's teammate is like one of the hardest jobs in the entire world, and you're never going to shine. So maybe my opinion would be changed if Bottas got a little bit more investment in him, because I mean, a pairing up against Ocon. I mean, I rate Ocon a lot, but he's been out of it. He's not been in a Formula One car for now like well over a year, and often you have teams that want that little bit of experience in the car to then help them settle out and kind of maximize on the year, so that they can put in upgrades and obviously all the lovely stuff that goes on if we would be racing right now. But they're not going to have that, and they're potentially, I mean, obviously we've all got our fingers crossed, and F1's plans seem to be pushing forward in terms of getting racing through this year, but it's not going to be in the same manner that we will have seen in any other season. So that's something that all the teams are having to consider when they're looking to 2021, however that's going to look when we get there. But it is going to be, I guess the argument is Alonso, whilst having been out of Formula One now for a little while, he does have that experience, and as you said, has been switching from series to series and still been massively successful, which you and I and the rest of the guys always kind of say is a good indicator of a brilliant driver, is their ability to jump from car to car or series to series and discipline to discipline, which Alonso does seem to be able to do very, very well. So is the argument there that actually he'd be a wise pick for Renault?
He would definitely be the quickest pick, I think, of the drivers available.
You're so diplomatic, Luke. I know. I'd be a great politician.
He would be the quickest option. Yes, like he is a phenomenal driver, one of the greatest, I think, ever to grace the Formula One grid. And it comes back to the debate of, is Formula One about having the 20 fastest drivers in the world competing? If it is, then Fernando Alonso absolutely is in that category. Like, he is one of the quickest 20 in the world without a doubt. So he would tick that box brilliantly for Renault. But when you get Fernando Alonso, you don't just get a really fast racing driver, as we're going to come on to, and as has been sort of mentioned in some of the fan submissions. He brings a lot with him. He brings a lot of politics. He brings a lot of toxicity, I think is the word that a few people have used. And that in itself, that's quite problematic. And you look at how things ended with Ferrari. You look at what happened at McLaren in his first stint there. And that's a big sort of red flag, like to use a motorsport pun. And I think people would maybe be a bit unsure about bringing that back to F1. Do Renault really want that? Do they need that? I'm not so sure. But I think if you wanted the out-and-out quickest driver available right now, Renault should be going after Fernando Alonso, definitely.
Oh, I've just seen Senna 007 UK saying that they should just bring Hulkenberg back on a year contract and see where they're at in 2021. I mean, that we've seen a lot of teams kind of go for that temporary kind of like fix, if you were. I mean, if you go back, I mean, I know that he's still there in the team, but that was kind of what Bottas's setup was. It was like, oh God, Rosberg's left. It's the end of the season. We go racing in a few months again, and we don't have a driver. Quick, let's get Bottas in on a year's contract, and he's still there. So it's proven that having that kind of temporary fix, if you have the right driver, does work out for you. But I mean, you're right in terms of, I think if you want a proven race winner and a former Formula One world champion, obviously the argument is it was in a very different era that he was winning championships with Renault. But he's proven that he can even get a dog of a McLaren up the grid and at least finish somewhere. So who would you pick? Would you pick Alonso or would you pick Hulkenberg? I'm putting you on the spot. You can ask me the same question if you want afterwards. It doesn't always have to be about you, Luke.
I would go for Hulkenberg, honestly. What do you think?
Oh, I mean, yeah, I think I would too. And it sounds quite harsh, but what does everybody else think? What does everybody else think at home? I want to see what's coming through on the chat to see what you guys think in terms of would you put in Hulkenberg or Alonso into that Renault? But anyway, let's have a quick listen to Sam, who also sent in their opinion on the whole situation. Sam, what have you got to say?
Renault should not sign Alonso. They've got bigger fish to fry. Alonso has passed his best. There are better options out there, and they need to look at their own problems internally within the team and the management side and the technical side to look at what's gone wrong over the last few years and why they haven't made the level of progress that they claimed they were going to make. I think that they're better off looking at younger drivers down the grid, maybe looking at someone like Pierre Gasly as a long-term option to have an all-French team with Ocon and Gasly, rather than looking at bringing in an ageing driver and hoping that he will all of a sudden bridge the gap to the top teams. They need to make big changes, big decisions for the long-term future of the team if Renault are ever going to be successful again in Formula One.
So again, do Renault have bigger fish to fry, I guess is the question. I mean, you kind of, again, we've been alluding to it throughout this, that they did not have the season they thought they were going to have last year. And it's come out today, hasn't it, that they're needing to seriously cost save. And, if they can't, are they even going to be in Formula One moving forward?
That's the big question, because we do obviously have unprecedented times with the pandemic. It's going to have a big financial impact on, I think, every aspect of society. But particularly in motor racing, I mean, ultimately, this is something that car makers do it's a thing on the side. Like, their bread and butter is always selling cars. That's what they want to do. And for them to sort of keep funding an expensive project like this, when, they're reportedly needing to make sort of somewhere near 2 billion worth of savings in the coming years, then you kind of say, well, what is the point of the F1 project? And Renault have invested a lot in it. Like, they've set themselves up to really, really sort of go for wins, go for glory. And it's not quite worked out. And I think that has led to some questions about, okay, well, what is the chance of this succeeding? And Daniel Ricciardo walking away that's a big, big sort of concern. But I think as we sort of come towards the budget cap era coming in, I think that's going to change a lot of things. We are sort of looking at this sort of $145 million cap that's going to be in place from next year that will make racing in F1 hopefully really sustainable and really affordable for teams, and hopefully even profitable. So I think the hope is that Renault will sort of say, well, look, we've invested all this money already. We've got our factory and everything as we want it. And we know from now on it's going to be 145 per year and that is it. Hopefully that'll be enough for them to keep racing, because we do need the big sort of brands and teams in F1, such as Renault. And then, I think once they sort of decide on that, then they can really think about their drivers and what they're going to do. Because, I think they do need to sort of work out how they're going to play it. But I think there's reason for sort of good confidence in Renault. I think the fact they have invested so heavily right the way leading up to this budget cap coming in, I think that's really good. Like, that is very, very positive for their future. But whether that's going to be enough to sort of become a championship winning team or someone that can win races, particularly in the sort of the span of time that Fernando Alonso realistically has to left to race in F1. I mean, he's 38, nearly 39. I'm not so sure. So I think time is also a big sort of consideration in all of this for Fernando.
Well, you mentioned the new regulations that are coming in 2022. We have a rather optimistic take from Francisco from Portugal. And this one, it gives me hope for F1. Let's take a look at what he said.
Yes, I think that Fernando Alonso should return to Formula One. In a very simple way of putting things, in 2022 we have new regulations, and these new regulations will be made with the same budget for everyone. At least there will not be anymore the big difference between Mercedes, Red Bull, Ferrari and the other teams. So I think that it is very important that this comes into equation in Fernando's decision, because he can come in 2021 knowing that in 2022 everyone will have the same opportunities, and it could be perfectly Renault to have a top car. Besides that, he does not have a chance to drive for Mercedes, Ferrari or Red Bull. So thinking in 2022, undoubtedly he should be back, yes, and he is one of the best, and the best should be in Formula 1.
2 points there. One, I just want to repeat, I love his optimism that he thinks the 2022 regulations are going to level the playing field and we're going to have 10 super competitive teams that are all gunning for podiums and wins and the championship. Now, maybe that's a little bit of exaggeration of what he said, but he's essentially saying that, why shouldn't Renault be able to offer Fernando a potentially race-winning seat? I don't know what you think about that, Luke. Do you share? I'm trying to emulate a lot of optimism here and a lot of hope for Formula One, especially right now when we don't have anything to watch. But what do you think? Do you think that's maybe a slightly naive take, or is it grounded?
I think it's grounded in good hope. I think it's definitely. That's definitely the intention. That's what F1 wants. They want it to be that everyone can spend the same amount of money, build different cars, so there is sort of that differentiation. It's not a spec series, and kind of be just as competitive as one another. And we would all love to see that. Realistically, though, that is not going to happen for a good sort of 4 or 5 years at the absolute earliest. I mean, all the teams have said that this year was meant to be the biggest spending year in F1 history because they all wanted to get their 2021 cars ready in time before the budget cap came in. And that you sort of have set in stone from 21, there'd always be that advantage that the teams with the money have kind of sort of preloaded and spent that would take years to wear off. And I think that McLaren were very honest about that. And they said, look, it'll take a good sort of while for us to get back towards the front of the pack. And you sort of see it with every regulation cycle that at first, okay, there's this massive advantage. We saw that with Mercedes in 2014. And bit by bit, it kind of shrinks and shrinks and shrinks. And I think that's going to happen again once the budget cap comes in. And hopefully that does speed things up. But realistically, it's still going to take a number of years. And it won't be a case of Fernando Alonso coming back in 2021 or 2022 when the budget cap comes in and the new regs and saying, right, you got a race-winning car now, mate. Don't worry. Because it just isn't going to happen like that, unfortunately. We'd love to see it. But I think that alone can't be enough to give Fernando Alonso a reason to want to come back to F1.
No, again, all good takes. And I guess the other area that we've kind of tiptoed around is Fernando's track record at teams. Yeah. Behind the scenes, not necessarily on the track, but obviously, can we say it's a coincidence that after Fernando has left some of the teams, those teams have actually been quite successful?
It's funny, isn't it? It's look, Fernando he's a fantastic driver, phenomenal, but he's also a very political animal, and he does, I think, really want sort of to build teams around him and everyone sort of centering on him, and that can work in some cases. We saw that most famously with Michael Schumacher at Ferrari. It worked perfectly. But Alonso, I think he really tried to sort of force the issue too much. And obviously, McLaren in 2007, he felt that they were favouring Lewis Hamilton too much. And that led to that spectacular fallout. Obviously, accusations of blackmail and things like that. And it really got nasty before his exit. He went back to Renault, obviously a very different Renault team to the one we know today, then run by Flavio Briatore, where he'd won his titles. And it was very much sort of a safe haven for him. Like, he's very sort of comfortable there. And it was his team. But then he went to Ferrari kind of with the hope of, okay, I can be the man to bring the success back to Ferrari. And it just didn't work. And by the end, 2014, it was horrible. Like, there were all kinds of plays behind the scenes to get him out the door and get Vettel into that seat, as has now happened. And then, Fernando was kind of left sort of a bit stuck. And obviously that led to his return to McLaren. And again, a very different McLaren team, I think, to the one that he had his previous beef with, particularly since Zach Brown's takeover. I mean, he's helped Fernando sort of realise his dream of going to Indianapolis and doing all of that, which is great. But there's still the problems that come with it. And I think we even saw that at Toyota in the World Endurance Championship. Now, I followed that I was there for Fernando's very first test in an LMP1 car right the way to his final race. And it was really interesting to see him come into this sort of environment where Toyota had, by far the quickest car, and it was never a question of were they going to win. It was a question of which of their two cars would win. And you kind of thought it was almost a bit of a gimme to Fernando, that just say, well, look, you've got to beat one other car, basically. It's you and your teammates. Good luck. And you should be at least a one-time Le Mans winner, maybe win the World Endurance Championship as well. And by the end of that story, and Fernando, after a year, left the team, said he wanted to explore other challenges. But even after the end of that year, things have gone sour with Toyota. And I struggled to believe that. But then you sort of talk to people and you're like, how has this happened again with a team that doesn't really have any competition? So it's not even like, okay, we've got to get together and rally together to beat those guys. Things had again sort of turned south, and people were pleased to see the back of Fernando from the LMP1 team. And that I think was that I just couldn't get my head around it, because it was like, well, what has caused this? Like, why has it happened again? And that is the worry, that I think wherever he goes, there is always sort of this baggage that comes with it. And it's a shame, because Fernando is so skilled and he's such an incredible driver. But I think it is this sort of toxic nature that it does make teams question, well, are we going to bring him back? And I've heard stories of sort of mechanics when they've heard rumours that Fernando might be coming back to their team, the team sort of rallying them around and saying, look, let's make this clear. He is not coming back here. Do not worry about it, because they're that sort of concerned about him returning. So that says a lot, I think. It's a concern, I think, that really must be taken into account when we do discuss the possibility of him coming back.
Yeah, that's quite a reputation you've got going for you if you've got mechanics cowering in their garages at the idea that you might even be stepping one foot in there, let alone driving in their car. But I mean, it is a strange one, isn't it? It's one of those things where, you know, we talk about rounded champions, and we've got another series going on the channel, if you've not spotted it already, where the internal experts at the Motorsport Network have all voted for their greatest F1 team of all time. And each member of the team is being qualified based on their skills, their careers. And one thing that keeps coming up time and time again is their ability to work with people, and their ability to rally and make a whole team work. And that's what's really kind of stuck with me throughout this entire project, because I've been, you know, it's been a pleasure to host that little series that we're running. So make sure you check it out. Little plug there. But, you know, when we were talking about the who's going to play our lead driver, which is an episode yet to air, it was very much about the drivers that they might have been difficult to handle. They might have had their quirks or their kind of misgivings, but there was never any of that, oh, they were awful to their team. And, you know, there was stories about certain drivers remembering everybody's birthdays on that team and getting them presents just so their morale's better. It's stories like that I've never heard a story like that related to Fernando Alonso. And I'm not saying that should take anything away from what he's achieved. He's a fantastic driver, and no one will be able to take that away from him. And, you know, there's been some absolute magic moments of him on track. But it is just that to be a champion and to be all that you can be, I feel like there are, you know, for one, you've got to have people that want to work with you. I mean, if you've got teams that don't want to work with you, then you're not going to get very far. But you've also got to be making clever choices, wise choices. And Fernando, I would argue, was kind of semi-forced into teams because of what had happened within them and the politics that had followed him. You know, I don't think any of us could have imagined him moving to McLaren in the state that he found it after he left Ferrari, again with a bitter taste in his mouth. And then obviously we saw it was sad to see him tootling around at the back of the grid, even though, again, as I kind of mentioned before, the fact that he could get that McLaren anywhere other than either a DNF or P20 or 19 was something of magic. It was still like, you just had the sense that that's not where he was meant to be. That's not where his talent would have said that he should be. But we've actually got a little clip in from @Steckleton_ on F1, who may have the solution to all this.
Should Alonso return to F1? I think he should. Just not in a driver's role. I think as a driver he had his time to shine, and the teams he left after he was there got better once he was gone. I don't think he's the right one to go after for Renault, because he wants so much more than they can offer, and we've seen how they went with McLaren. But with his experience and with the pull he has from PR side, from the myth around him working with a team, giving his knowledge and helping a team to rebuild is something that is needed.
So there we go. Could he come back in a non-driver role and still have that influence that comes with Fernando Alonso? Because what at Steckleton _ on F1 did raise, which is completely true, is that man is a press machine. I seriously don't know how he does it, but the spin and the hype around him whenever he breathes is incredible. So much as we've kind of said about how much marketing power someone like Ricciardo has, he does still have that. And could a team still take advantage of that without actually putting them in their car?
I'd like to see that, definitely. We've seen Fernando branch into that. He's obviously got his Formula 4 FA racing team, I believe it's called. It's dabbling a bit in esports as well. And so there is clearly an interest from him for that. And he's got the lovely sort of livery cars that are sort of made to look like his helmet. And that is clearly of interest to him to go down that route in the future. And I think the interesting thing, if Fernando were to do that, is that there would be no excuses. Like, he couldn't then say, oh, this has failed because of X, Y, and Z, like as with his F1 projects, like at McLaren the first time around and the second time around, and at Ferrari, where it's like, well, it didn't work because of the car or because of the politics or whatever. If he ran a racing team, he would be the only person who would be responsible for it. And I think we saw that with Alain Prost as well, when he tried his F1 team, and ultimately that ended in failure, because it just wasn't the same, and it didn't quite work. But Prost gave it his all, and I would love to see Fernando give it a go with something like that. And I think maybe like running like his own team in F1, I think that might be a little bit of a stretch, particularly the sort of era we're now in. But it'd be interesting. I think if a team wanted to sort of work with him and say, look, we can sort of like lean on your sort of knowledge and experience here. I think that's a bit what McLaren wanted to do last year. They kept him on as an ambassador. I think sort of used him to give the car a test and sort of work with Lando Norris and Carlos Sainz. But really, he sort of faded from the background quite quickly once Andreas Seidel turned up, and that sort of seemed to be a real sort of break point for Fernando with McLaren. Whether a team like Renault, I mean, might they say, look, we don't want you in the car, but we'd be interested in you having sort of in a development role and advisory role, maybe with a view to one day being a team principal. That, I think, could be of cool interest. So, yeah, I would quite like to see that, because he is, for all of his flaws that we've spoken about, he's a fascinating person. He is really, really just one of these characters in F1 that it's just incredible, the story that's happened over the past sort of 15, 20 years. So I think to have that back in the paddock on a full-time basis would be really cool. So the idea of him maybe, say, being a team principal, I think that'd be pretty good to see.
I think I'm inclined to agree. And I'm interested to see what people on the chat think. I've just seen a comment from Gino Marilla Morales. I mean, that's a brilliant name.
Nice.
But they are asking, genuinely curious to hear your views on small moments influencing the bigger picture. If he'd have had just 8 more points, he'd be a McLaren and a 2 times Ferrari champ, with everything else being the same. Now, I guess that end bit is key to that point, in that not everything is the same. But he did come close, didn't he? It wasn't, the fact that he only has 2 world titles next to his name in the record books actually doesn't give the full picture, does it?
Absolutely not, no. And I think he will always be regarded as one of these drivers who their actual, like, the record that we know is way beyond what you'll see written in a record book or a textbook or online anyway. Because, those little moments, as Gino says, could have been so different for his career. And you think back to 2012, had it not been for the start line crash at Spa or the crash at the start of Suzuka, either of those don't happen, and Fernando is champion that year. 2010, again, there are those moments that you look at and say, well, that was where the title was lost. And they are such tiny, fine margins. But then the same is true for so many others. I mean, you could easily make an argument for Lewis Hamilton never winning a world title until sort of, 2015 or something like that, or 2014. But then the flip side of it, Lewis could be like a 9-10 time champion by now. So I think we've got to be careful when we go down that route. But I think with Fernando especially, I don't think there's anyone who would say, no, he only deserved 2 world titles. Because, yeah, I think 2012 especially, he outstripped that Ferrari's performance by such an incredible margin. And was so good that year. I mean, that was, I think, Fernando's absolute peak. And it still just wasn't enough, and that did leave us with sort of the hollow stare through his visor at the end in the Brazil rain. That I think that really did sum up Fernando's F1 career, just like so close, but not quite close enough.
Yeah, if nothing else, Fernando's given us so many great memes and gifs. If that's his legacy,
the deck chair is still the peak for me. Like that was the star.
Exactly. And he knows what he's doing. He didn't do that by accident. He totally knows what he's doing, which is fab, and I love it. I was just seeing Andrew Gurney has said, which I think is a really good point, that the great drivers win and win in the best cars, but more importantly, they keep the best cars.
Yes,
and I guess that's what we could definitely say about the likes of Lewis Hamilton is, you know, a lot of the criticism that's thrown at Hamilton is that, well, of course he's winning world titles. He's in the best car, but the best drivers keep the best cars. I really like that, Andrew. I think that's a great little bit of commentary there. Matt Buck says Alonso and Vettel need to restart the CBBC commentary stream. Blue flags and memes all day.
I'd love to see that. Wow.
I mean, if neither of them are going to be on the old F1 grid, why not pull them in for some alternate commentary? That could be quite enjoyable. Let's see what else people has to say. Blue flag Alpha says Bottas is in the best car, but he can't win the title. So I mean, we're not going to turn this into a Bottas bashing fest because that's not fair. We're here to talk about Alonso. But let's see if there's any. We've definitely got some agreements with the deck chair meme winning. Let's have this is quite controversial. Reg Diakite, I'm sorry if I've said your username wrong. Don't forget that he snitched on McLaren and cheated the next year with Renault, and he always gets to come back with those teams, which is stupid. Now, any idea what he's referencing there, Luke?
Do you want to say it, or shall I say it? Or like,
I feel like I always put this on you, and I feel bad.
No, it's fine. No,
you explain these situations so well for the fans, Luke. That's why I'm throwing it. Yeah.
Thanks, Jess. Yeah, thanks.
I could be diplomatic too.
Touche. 2007. Obviously, we had the Spygate saga at McLaren that Fernando did play a role in, not it happening, but in terms of the evidence that the FIA was finding, in terms of sort of withholding emails or threatening to release emails. And then in 2008, we had Crashgate. It's always a gate, isn't it? With the incident in Singapore that obviously paved the way for Fernando Alonso to win that race. Fernando's involvement in that's never been formally sort of stated or anything like that. That did very much seem a thing behind the scenes at Renault. So I think on that, let's sort of be a bit fairer. But yeah, those were sort of probably the two biggest major political incidents in recent F1 history, and Fernando was with those teams. And yeah, returning, I think, again at McLaren, there was a sort of changing of the guard happening there anyway. And again, this Renault team is a vastly different Renault team to the one that raced in sort of that sort of era from 2002 to 2009. It is a team that is very, very different now. So I don't think that would be sort of a stumbling block for Fernando to return with Renault.
No, I think, just as I thought, it's brilliantly explained. Let's move on. Just a couple more points from fans in the chat. So Stephen Berwick says, Roman Grosjean to Renault, Mick Schumacher to Haas. It's 1 year early maybe for Mick, but Ferrari might want to use this time to squeeze Schumacher into a car he can develop in. Now, that's a bit of we're kind of trying to fill this Renault seat with various members of people. I mean, we heard a different Frenchman being mentioned before in Pierre Gasly. But what do we think about a Romain Grosjean Ocon lineup at Renault?
I don't see that somehow. I don't think that Grosjean would offer sort of the long-term thing that Renault wants. Like Renault, they love Romain Grosjean. Like, they're a big fan of him. They tried getting him for the team when it came back in 2016. I think there was an approach after that as well. So I think that it does make sense on that front. But I think that they are they've got to think long term with all of this. Daniel was meant to be their long term option, and I think Grosjean, he's maybe just getting on a bit in his F1 career to really sort of do that. I like the idea of Gasly going there, actually. Like, I'd not really thought of that, but that I think would fit sort of the sort of image that I think Renault want. Have a sort of young, very French team. I think him and Ocon together would. Oh no, they really don't go on, actually, do they? Oh no, that wouldn't work. They do not like each other. So let's ignore that idea and move very swiftly on.
Hey, there's been time, and Gasly had a hell of a season last year, but you don't think that's reparable?
No. I asked Gasly about it in pre-season, and the answer was very short, and we moved on very quickly.
Brilliant. Love that little bit of insight from the paddock, even if it was only in pre-season. That's great. Well, I think that's pretty much all we've got time for, but thank you as always so much, everybody at home, for getting involved. Your takes really do make this show, so thank you so much. Thanks for getting involved in the chat. Again, like, we love bringing your takes as we're talking through, because it shapes this show and it's brilliant. If you are listening on audio, make sure you subscribed to the podcast, as well as giving us a rating, because it really helps us index, and it also gives us an idea if you're enjoying what we're talking about, because otherwise, we don't know. Let us know in the comments if you're watching on YouTube as well, if we're doing a good job, or if you hate what we're doing. Hopefully you don't, because we put a lot of effort into this and we really want to entertain you. But anyway, I'm waffling. I'm clearly, it's the heat. It's getting to me. But anyway, thanks ever so much again for joining us. We'll be back next week, hopefully live again, so you can get involved. But until then, it's goodbye from me finally, and it's a goodbye from Luke.
Bye.